Hey, good afternoon. This is Ken Larson and Brent Farmer with land in Arkansas, buying and selling. We are down in the Ozarks, Boston Mountains, Northwest Arkansas. We're going to do a perc test today. A lot of people ask, what does that entail? What do I need to do, etc. after you buy land. What's neat about this is this land was in the original episode we did, and we actually sold this land, and we're going to do the perc test on this property. So we're going to get started. And good to have you back. We're back with land in Arkansas. We're getting ready to do a perc test. We have the owners here, Eric and Kelly Robb, Jeff Tyler, who is the
licensed designated representative.
And we also have Jackie Moore, who is a licensed installer. He's going to be doing the dig for us. But what we're walking through is just all the different things involved in this. It's going to be a three-bedroom house. They've already somewhat discussed the lateral lines. But there's going to be an ongoing discussion and just what Jeff is looking for as we go through there, and whatever you'd like to add.
Sure. Basically what we're going to try to do is, based on his home location, we're going to dig at a minimum of 2 test pits. We'll dig down about 36 to 42 inches deep, about 2 to 3 feet wide, and about 5 to 6 feet long. And I will actually get down in the pit to look at the sidewall to determine the characteristics of the soil. And those soil characteristics will help me to determine, number one, is this soil suitable for a standard septic system? And then number two, based on the soil characteristics and the number of bedrooms, what is the loading rate? The loading rate is what I will use to determine how much linear footage is needed for the home.
How do you know on the soil? Is it just the porosity, I guess, for lack of a better word? Or?
Whenever we evaluate the soil, I'm trying to look at really 3 different things. Soil's going to have sand, silt, and clay. Obviously, the more clay in the soil, that's going to potentially restrict the water flow. One of the main objectives of evaluating the test pits is to determine at what depth is a perched water table. That's what is really used to determine that loading rate, is what depth in the soil is there evidence of a perched water table. Typically that evidence is going to be what we refer to as gray modeling. You'll see the soil go from a brownish reddish color to a lighter gray color. Whenever that gray soil picks up, I measure that depth, and then I plug that into a chart, and it gives me that loading rate that I referenced earlier.
Now, how Eric and Kelly want a 3-bedroom house, and you have a pond in front of it. You have to stay so far off the pond, correct?
Correct. All parts of the system, if the pond, backing up a little bit, is entirely on Eric and Kelly's property, then all parts of that septic system would have to maintain a minimum of 50 feet from all parts of the system to the ponds. Now, if by chance there was an adjacent pond, say we're roughly on the corner of Eric and Kelly's proposed property, or on a side, if there's an adjacent pond that would be a neighbor's, then we have to maintain a 100-foot setback from the neighbor's pond. But again, as long as the pond is entirely on the owner's property, the 50-foot setback is required.
Now, along those lines, how far do you have to stay off the property lines as well?
10 feet off the property lines. All parts of the septic system only have to be 10 feet off the property lines, 10 feet off driveways. 10 feet's kind of the magic number. One exception would be, and a pretty big exception, if there is any old water wells on the property. That septic system, again, all parts, starting from where it comes out of the house to the tank to the box to your field lines, all parts of that system would have to be 100 feet from that water well. Even if they're not using that water well, there could be public water available, and they may be connected to public water. But if that water well is within 100 feet, that presents a problem. Now, it's not a deal breaker. If the owner decides, hey, this is going to be the best place to put the system. Well, if I decide this is the best place to put the system, and the owner says we're not going to use that well, it's not any of our concern, then we can close that well. Once that well has been closed, then that 100-foot setback is taken off.
And once you have that, you'll design the system, correct? And then it will go to, like, Jackie, an installer. Is that how it works?
Well, in between, once the soil suitability is determined, and it's determined that we need 300 feet of line, then I will shoot grade elevations and etc. to determine where those lines need to be located. I typically flag out all parts of that system on site, and at that point is when I submit the permit to the state. Crawford County has a gentleman that's referred to as an environmental health specialist. He comes on site after I submit the permit. He does his review also. He's going to look at the soil to determine that if he concurs with what I have submitted, then obviously he's going to make sure that I've dotted the I's and crossed the T's with my drawings, and we've met all the setbacks, we've met all the regulations. If everything meets the state's requirements, then they actually approve the permit for construction. That's the first phase. The permit for construction is approved, and at that time it will be mailed back to Eric and Kelly. Once Mr. Eric gets the permit, that's when he could possibly get with Mr. Moore, and at that time he would be able to get a bid on the installation of that system. One other thing that I would like to add with that permit, most of these water associations in our area, they're typically not going to set a new water meter until they have seen a copy of that septic system permit. Yep. Now, there is an exception to that. Crawford County is still one of the counties that will allow a 10-acre exemption. Okay, we hadn't really talked about the 10-acre exemption, but if an individual owns more than 10 acres and they can keep all parts of that septic system a minimum of 200 feet off of the road and the property line, then they can potentially qualify for an exemption.
And that's what we were thinking of doing here, because we got 20 acres, but we're so close to that property line, we'll be way closer than 200 feet. So,
and you still have to file, right? What we figured out on the...
Correct. If you do go the exemption route, in this scenario, let's say this property was 20 acres and he's right in the middle of it, and the closest property line was over 200 feet, then he could contact the Crawford County Health Department, the environmental health specialist. He's, again, the representative. You basically just go in as an owner and say, hey, I'm requesting a 10-acre exemption. Can I have the paperwork provided to me to complete, and in return I will get that documentation back to you. Typically what they want, there's a form that you sign basically requesting it. They typically do need a 911 address, because if they being the state, if they're going to issue an exemption, they want to issue that exemption to a specific 911 address for it specifically for that particular site. Once they get the form signed by the owner, they will also ask to see either a copy of a survey or some type of aerial where they can indicate on that drawing where the house is going to be located, and then the owner can do all of this. He can just show where we're going to propose our house here, north, south, east, and west, we're greater than 200 feet. And once that is provided, then the state will actually issue another letter that basically says you have met our criteria for a 10-acre water or for a 10-acre exemption. You're not required to get a septic system permit. That document Eric could take to the water company, and they would accept that also.
And in this property, it's impossible because it's narrow and long. Right. So no matter what, we'd be close to Carrie's property line or the people across the street. So there's no place on this lot we could build a house without doing the test.
Another thing to touch on that Jeff did is the 911 address, and you guys are going to go through this too. Most of the land when you buy it out here does not have an address. Right. 911 meaning it's set up in their system. You're going to need that for your septic, for your water, and for your electric. I'm actually doing one up on the other side of the mountain for electric. Every one of them will need it. You basically call the county, and if you just ask for who do I talk to for 911 address, they'll all know what you're talking about and get you in touch with them.
And that's what we had to do in Newton County when we did it too.
And it's the 10-acre exemption, though. You're saying Crawford's one of the last counties that hasn't changed that?
Well, Washington and Benton, to my understanding, both have a county ordinance that did away with the 10-acre exemption. I work predominantly in Crawford and Sebastian counties, and both of those counties still do honor the 10-acre exemption. As far as one of the last counties, that I'm not sure, because I really just kind of stay in a restricted area up here. But
now, if I know someone that broke the rules and didn't go through all this, we'll just call him Brent for this. What happens to Brent?
And you mean if he puts in an illegal septic system?
Correct.
Well, it happens. I mean, typically, unless there's some type of complaint, you know, chances are the state is not going to be aware of it. I mean, they typically
But it could always catch you if you're trying to resell.
Oh,
and things
absolutely.
like
Now
that
that
down the
is
road.
a valid
Yeah.
point. If there comes a time in the future when the property comes up for sale, they typically, you know, banks want to know, can we get a copy of that septic
Right.
system permit? Well, if there's no permit, I mean, the state does maintain copies of them, and now they can track them by these 911 addresses. That's another reason why the 911 address is so important. But I mean, if there's no permit, then
Well, the
it's
things you
just
said
not
too, it's
available.
getting more and more sophisticated. I think people that want to just go do this stuff, it's going to get harder and harder for them to do. And you may as well just do it right and go through the system, was the point I was making. So, my opinion.
Yeah, I think there's you know, numerous advantages to getting the system permitted. Number one, you know, it's sized adequately. It's been designed in an area where the soil is determined that it's to be suitable. I mean, obviously, even though there's no guarantee for any septic system, you do everything you can on the front end to ensure that you've tried to install the best system for that particular site that you can.
Yeah, all better for the landowner, really, to have the
Absolutely.
best possible system done correctly. So
And odds are someone's going to resell it. And we
Yeah.
all say we won't, but
Yeah.
you know, you like I say, do it right the first time around. We're going to let them get after everything here. We're just going to tag along to get some gratuitous advertising in here. Jeff Tyler covers Sebastian and Crawford. He can come out and set you up on your septic system. Eric actually is a home inspector. We'll throw that in there too, in Fayetteville down to Fort Smith. Jackie Moore does all kinds of things, including installing septic systems. But we're down in the Crawford County area right now, and if we can help with any of those, we'll put you in touch with any of them.
So now we can finally get to the fun stuff.
Yep.
Absolutely.
let's do it.
Okay, let's do it.
All right, so I'll show you the corner of the house.
Yes,
So-
sir.
All right, we just heard from Jeff, and he is a wealth of knowledge about soil and systems and getting the right septic system in place for percolation and all that. So this all couldn't fit on one video, so we got to push this to a second video as well. So consider this an intermission. The next video should be coming up right now.